Support for Political Takeout comes from a male GIMP.
Male GIMP?
From a male GIMP.
GIMP?
More than 7 million businesses around the world use a mail GIMP to send packages,
newsletters,
and deliver high fives.
Mail GIMP. Send better packages today.
I use a mail GIMP.
You do? You're a liberal Democrat.
Previously on Political Takeout.
Appearing naked. I've got 14 cats which look like Ed balls.
Well, I always did rather like graveyards, it has to be said. And I actually agree with you that being in politics helps you like graveyards for some reason. I don't know why, but...
It did come as something of a shock to discover that he was a purchaser of crack cocaine.
I think that must be the first time that Richard Bacon and Winston Churchill have shared a sentence.
You told us before the show that you went for a pint in a pub.
Fresh from the pub,
Yeah.
But I'm, not asking that I should run the country. I'm not particularly bothered whether or not politicians drink in the pub. I think that's an overrated virtue.
You have reached the offices of the Spectrum Radio Network. I'm afraid there's no one here to answer your call at the moment. However, if you leave your message, your name, and the time of the call, we will get back to you. Thank you for calling the Spectrum Radio Network.
You're listening to me, Rupert Myers.
And me, Bobby Friedman.
This is Political Takeout, back for a special series of weekly podcasts between now and the general election, a novelty crisp bag containing the week's top stories washed down with a freshly brewed bottle of the week's comedy.
On the menu for you this week, we've a lineup so good that, hell yes, you should be listening. The only question is, are you tough enough? First up, we'll be asking who has landed the first punch. No, not Jeremy Clarkson or his producer, but David Cameron or Ed Miliband, as the fight for Downing Street finally gets underway. Then we'll be speaking to UKIP's least favourite person. Okay, UKIP's least favourite person after all of the UK's immigrant population. That's the Times' Matthew Parris, about whether Nigel Farage and his party are the victims of media snobbery. Next we'll be talking about the BBC's Top Gear. No, not the contents of Richard Bacon's overnight bag, but instead the decision to sack Jeremy Clarkson from the popular motoring show. And then, in the wake of the Germanwings tragedy last week, we'll be asking whether pilots with depression should be flying our aircraft.
But first, with weeks of hellish idle speculation to go, we toast the end of a coalition government with smart money claiming that the outcome of the general election is too difficult to call. Unperturbed by what smart people are doing, the time has come for us to guess wildly about what might happen on May the 7th. Miliband, the people's weirdo, looks set to lose Scotland, and Cameron is trying to become Prime Minister for a second time without ever winning an election.
Now to discuss this, we are joined by the duck gyoza and beef stir-fry of political commentators. It's the Telegraph's Willard Foxton and Abi Wilkinson from the Daily Mirror. After long discussion, we understand that Willard refuses to debate with Abi, but we have arranged a compromise. Willard will take questions first and will leave the studio before Abi is then quizzed by a man wearing a David Dimbleby mask.
No, it's all right. I'm braver than Cameron, and Abi's less weird than Ed Miliband. So
Okay, well, as you have graciously agreed to debate each other, let's start off with you, Abi. How do you see things changing between now and the election, or are we going to be pegged at 34, 35% for the two main parties all the way between now and May?
I think Ed Miliband, when I actually see him, is very different to the Ed Miliband I read about in the papers, honestly. I thought his response to the budget was strong. I'm not saying he couldn't mess up, but I don't know. I don't think Miliband's as incompetent as
I think
people
the
like
problem
to
is
write him as.
not Miliband, but Miliband's team, which I think is really terrible. So, for example, look at the fact that Labour is putting out mugs which say "down with foreigners" on it, right?
Yes.
Miliband's team cannot control the message, and basically the Labour press team is composed of Labour loyalists, and they're given these jobs as sinecures on their way to safe seats. And I think the problem Labour has is it needs to employ professionals rather than people who are true believers. I covered the 2012 election in America, and the big problem was the Democrats would hire people who were good at their jobs, whereas the Republicans would only hire true believers. And I think that's the problem that Miliband has, that his press team is disastrous.
Well, Abi, you obviously want Ed Miliband to win.
Of the available options.
But you do want him to win there.
Yes.
Then, so it's interesting though that you do say that of the available options, you aren't prepared to stand here and say I want him to win full stop.
It's difficult because you know what lines of attack. You know what they're under attack on, and you know what they feel like they have to say, but at the same time, you kind of wish the conversation was a bit smarter.
A lot of these things are kind of foreseeable, aren't they? Like the kitchen gate thing, the mug thing. If you sat someone down and said, "Does this look like a good idea?"
Well, that kitchen thing was nonsense. That was. You're not like.
I kind of partially agree with you. The kitchen thing was nonsense. Like, like if anyone who thinks David Cameron doesn't have, if David Cameron wanted a dozen kitchens, all with baits from Downton Abbey, he could have them, right? It's not like he's a man of the people.
Why would he cut down on his number of kitchens to 12 though? That would be
12, 24, as many kitchens as he likes. I think that the issue with it is the fact that the Labour spinners are so bad that they deliberately set up the photo shoot and put them in that austere kitchen, and they only thought as far as Ed will look like a man of the people, and they didn't think that leap beyond into actually, why don't we just picture him in his normal kitchen?
On the other hand, if we're talking about kitchen gaffes, Cameron's kitchen gaff, although Ed Miliband's was funnier, without doubt, the gaff from Cameron in his kitchen was far worse, wasn't it?
Well, I don't know. It's just honest, right? Like, you look at it and you go, is he going to do a third term? No. Why? We always say we want politicians to be honest. We finally get a politician saying, you know what? 2 terms as Prime Minister is going to be enough for me, and I'm either going to serve it's a realistic option. He's either going to serve a second term as Prime Minister or he's gone. So he's honest. He says, I'm not going to go for a third term, and we all lambast him for it.
Abby, you're nodding at that. I find that surprising.
No, I'm not. I wasn't nodding.
Just nodding a little bit. Just moving your head up and down.
I'm just saying that clearly, you were right, it's a bigger gap than being filmed. I don't still fully understand why it matters which kitchen he was filmed in.
Because he's trying to, just to try to explain my point, he's trying to create a perception, the Labour press team is trying to create a perception that Ed Miliband is like you, like me. He has a small kitchen, he has a very austere kitchen where, him and his wife can barely fit into it. So I think the idea they were trying to create was subconsciously that him and Justine are just like you and me.
But it seems like nonsense to me that for some reason it's seen as worse to care about people who are struggling if you're not struggling than to not care about people who are struggling and also not be struggling.
The attack on the Conservatives is that you're a party of posh millionaires. How can you understand what's going on?
No, it's saying the reason you're doing what you're doing is because you're a party of posh millionaires, so you don't have to understand. It's not saying that people in your situation can't understand.
The truth is, Ed Miliband is a quite posh millionaire, isn't he?
Sure, but the whole Labour Party is not made up of people like that.
No, just the ones who inherited their seats from older generations of their family, and the ones that carry out hard.
But I think there's two different. There's a thing saying like you can ignore an issue if you're very privileged. It doesn't mean you definitely will ignore the issue if you're very privileged. And it's just saying Conservative Cabinet's able to.
But isn't Cameron's problem that, as was portrayed in The Coalition, and we interviewed the actor earlier, and that film's kind of, the thesis was that people didn't connect with Cameron on an emotional level. Whereas he's much more polished than Ed Miliband. The reason people respond to Ed is actually they can kind of see the working going on behind the facade. Whereas with Cameron, people aren't buying that in sufficient numbers because he's either too smooth, too well scripted. Isn't that a problem the Conservatives haven't managed to address?
Well, I think it's a problem that everyone has. I was talking to a friend the other day about the fact that the legacy parties all have this enormous baggage. Like, logically, there are a lot of Conservative policies that really help working class towns in the north, rural areas in Scotland, but no one is going to vote for them because of the legacy of things that happened when we were all children. So
but it matters.
Sorry.
Like it matters when you have family members who didn't, have not worked for a long period of time. It really you're saying that to us because this kind of northern powerhouse is all very well and good promising it now. You've been in power 5 years,
Well, I haven't been in power. Things would be much better if I'd been in power.
Okay, but the Conservative response to that would be that the number of jobs has gone up and that the economy is the fastest growing in the G7 and the deficit is down.
Sure, but councils in northern cities have lost a lot of funding for various things, and councils in other parts of the country haven't.
Both parties, I genuinely feel there is a substance to that UKIP attack, that all parties are the same in their inner core. It's the same people from the same universities with the same degrees and the same interests.
Went to the same schools.
But I think you're right. But I think that's the disingenuous UKIP line of attack, which masks. You know what I mean? You're right. It's a very easy argument.
They've highlighted a problem. They've highlighted a problem.
Sure,
they may not be the solution.
Exactly. Yeah.
But what I'm interested in, so you want Ed Miliband to win. You've said fair enough of the available options. But do you think that people criticise the Conservatives for not putting forward
a positive message. Is the same true of both major parties, that actually Labour aren't being bold enough?
I feel like, for whatever reason, and I don't know when it happened, the terms of the sort of conversation have been set, and the Labour have lost the economic debate whether or not they actually should have. So they're sort of, I just feel like Labour are like arguing on ground that's not familiar to them and that they wouldn't normally want to be.
Perhaps, like, if you could just each of you sum up. I'm going to pick Abi for Labour and Willard for the Conservatives. What are the things you'd do between now and the election to secure a majority if you were running the campaign?
I don't emphasise positive things that we're going to do for groups that have been hit by Conservative policies. I'd run a more positive campaign.
But
I think they should be trying. I mean, personally, I think they should be trying to win the youth vote, but clearly they've decided that that's not the very top priority.
And Willard?
If I was the Tories, I would keep my hands inside the roller coaster car. I would wait for Labour to screw up, and if they don't screw up, prepare a massive offer for the Scottish Nationalists. Because ultimately, you've got to remember...
That's not going to happen.
No, but the Scottish Nationalists were propped up by the Tories between 2007 and 2011. Tories and the SNP can work together. I would come up...
God, it's moved on from there, hasn't it?
What would they have to offer, do you think?
Well, I think, they can offer a lot more than Labour can.
All of the North Sea's oil reserves.
Yeah. But they can offer a lot more than Labour can, because ultimately Labour wants to win those seats back. Yeah. The Tories have less in play in Scotland, and therefore they can literally go, they can throw their hands up and go, we'll give you complete all but autonomy in Scotland as long as you keep the union.
Federalism, total federalism.
No, absolutely.
Haven't they officially ruled it out?
And why would the SNP? Well, they have, but what if the SNP?
Do you believe them?
Who's going to vote SNP if they prop up the Tories?
Right, that's why they wouldn't admit to it now.
What if they get full independence?
The Tories?
Because by next time they will have had a second referendum. Is the argument.
Well, but the other thing I think as well is that you might end up in a situation where if I'd vote SNP if they gained all but independence, the same sort of situation the Quebecois have in Canada, where they've got, their own flag, their own economic policy, everything the SNP's always wanted, apart from rid of the Queen. I'd vote SNP then, because they've given you everything they said they'd give you.
I know we say only an idiot can predict this general election with any certainty. So, with all respect to you two, I want a deliberate, specific prediction.
Because you have been carefully selected.
Seats within 5 seats.
No, what?
Come on.
I'll
go
300. Tories square on 300, and the defining moment of the campaign being a disastrous Labour gaffe that puts the Tories at 300 and enables a very narrow coalition with Lib Dems maybe 27, 28, and you've got a very slim 2-seat majority for a Tory Lib Dem coalition.
Slightly below 300 for Labour, maybe 290, just propped up by SNP.
And Tories on what? But less or more than 290. Who's biggest party?
Very close.
Come on, get off the fence.
I don't want to. Very close. Potentially. I don't want to say it. Potentially a few more seats are Tory, but Tories were unable to form government.
Interesting. Right. We're on. Abi, thank you very much.
UKIP is one of the big stories of this election, but the party and its supporters have come under sustained fire from journalists. Most recently, in last week's Sunday Times, Camilla Long said that South Thanet, Nigel Farage's prospective constituency, is the English Defence League on sea. Matthew Parris, who writes for The Times, knows what it's like to be criticised by UKIP when he went to Clacton and wrote a whole host of negative things about the party's supporters. We spoke to him a little bit earlier today.
How do you feel your articles have gone down with UKIP supporters?
Like a bucket of the proverbial, I think.
What is it that creates such vitriol amongst UKIP supporters when you write an article like the one you wrote about Clacton or Camilla Long has written now about South Thanet?
Well, I think UKIP as a party is actuated by a dislike and resentment, and so it probably comes the more naturally to UKIP supporters to dislike and resent any criticism of themselves. They also tend to predicate their political views on a belief that there's a a sort of unspoken conspiracy against.
Does it concern you at all that some people might say that you're not helping the sort of the unity of the right by criticising UKIP on a cultural level?
I'm not a propagandist for the Conservative Party, so I never ask myself whether things I say or write are good for the party cause, even though I am a Conservative. So it doesn't trouble me that I may actually cause difficulties for some people who are broadly on the same side as me. And I don't think that you can talk about politics in Britain without talking about cultures. And if there is a culture of failure and a culture of pessimism and a culture of regretting the way Britain is going, socially, culturally, as well as in other ways, one can't respond to that except with an analysis that does seem to be culturally hostile, so to speak, and I am hostile to UKIP's culture.
How much of the UKIP attraction comes from a sense of hopelessness, do you think?
Well, as I say, I think UKIP tends to appeal to people who regret the way things are today, and that may sometimes have some bearing or be in some way informed by their own lives. UKIP tends to feel a sort of nostalgia and a belief that things were better in the past, and there may well be an element in some UKIP supporters' feelings that their own lives too were better in the past or could have been better. There is a sort of sense of disappointment about what I might describe as the UKIP feeling.
And
I wouldn't go as far as Boris Johnson, though, in his remarks about UKIP and vacuum cleaner related injuries.
Now, last week Germanwings flight 4U9525 crashed in the French Alps. It's since become clear that the 27-year-old co-pilot Andreas Lembit deliberately caused the plane to crash in a sickening murder-suicide, killing all 150 people on board.
Much of the coverage of the crash has focused on Lubitz' mental health, with reports that he was suffering from depression and questions being asked about why he was allowed to fly at all. A number of mental health charities have spoken out condemning the coverage of this tragic event.
Willard Foxton and Abi Wilkinson are still with us. So, Abi, what's your view on this? It's a difficult one, isn't it? Because on the one hand, you don't want pilots like Lubitz killing people, but then there are millions of people out there with depression who get on with everyday life completely normally.
I feel like the conversation's been really polarised, and there's half of people who want to sort of say, you know, it was clearly his depression, clearly he wasn't fit to do the job, and then people reacting to that saying, you know, it's nothing to do with that, you're just stigmatising depressed people. And it's difficult because, yes, most depressed people can do the job perfectly fine, and that probably involves piloting, but to sort of dismiss the kind of idea that it might have had anything to do with it, apart from anything else, trivialises the severity of depression. And I have like one friend actually who is depressed who has kind of actually like altered my opinion on this. He said, like, you know, I just want depression to be taken seriously, and if you're going to take it seriously, you have to realise that it is serious enough that it could make someone do something like that. And like all of this stuff dismissing the idea it could have any impact at all, I'm finding quite alienating, because I couldn't say what I might do if I was sat in a cockpit, and that sort of did change my opinion a little bit.
Willard, what's your take on
It
it?
reminds me a lot of the Charlie Hebdo thing, where some people, you know, the binary option was it's all to do with Islam or it's nothing to do with Islam, and you had to pick one or the other. And I think Abi's absolutely right in many ways, whereby you've got to pick depression is evil and depressed people should be locked in padded rooms, or depressed people are totally fine and this is all just the Daily Mail making house prices go down. And I think the truth is the issue is much more nuanced than that. You know, like, And one of the big problems with murder and murder suicides like this is it only has to seem like a good idea to an airline pilot for 2 minutes, and there you go. Like everyone on the plane is dead, and it happens quite regularly as well. Like it's happened a dozen or so times in the last 50 years.
But most people who are depressed, if they become suicidal at all, or have suicidal feelings towards themselves, they don't become psychopathic. And I think taking down a plane of 150 people is psychopathic.
I think psychopathic isn't. I mean, I can't know what his mental state was at that time, but I think people are irrational because I think often suicide's irrational. Like I'm not saying that people want to kill themselves never had good reasons, and I mean, for the right to euthanize yourself and all of that. But people get irrational. Like I've never suffered from depression, but I've certainly been in temporary self-destructive mindsets to a lesser extent. I'm not saying I'd do something like that, but I do think people sort of like. And I'm not sure I'm not sure it's fair to say that he was fully comprehended that he was. I mean, he could have. Who knows? He could have known what he was doing.
The other guy on board the plane was banging on the cockpit door, asking him to let them in.
Sure, I'm not trying to.
Pretty obvious.
He's a mass murderer, and I'm not trying to trivialise it. I'm just saying that I'm not. It's difficult without knowing. We can never know what's going on in his head, and without knowing, we can't know the extent to which he fully...
I think the problem is the label, right? We've labelled him there psychopathic, right? And the truth is, do we want... If you ask the question, if you put on the front of every newspaper, pilots shouldn't be psychopaths, I think that's a pretty unarguable statement, right? But the problem with it is what's actually happened is papers have run with, how could they let him fly? He was depressive. And you're like, 1 in 4 or 5 people are depressive.
Yes. But if he was alive, he should be locked up forever. I don't want this to go out and people to think I'm sort of trivialising the extent of the crime. No,
but there's a serious question there, isn't it? Because on the other, it is all well and good saying, well, people with depression can do all these things, but on the other hand, I imagine if it had been my friend or family member on that flight, I probably wouldn't be feeling too good about people saying it's fine.
But I mean, he passed a psych test, so maybe there's something wrong with their testing.
But hang on, so just come back. Willard, you say it's the wrong label. In what way?
Well, I mean, clearly the point is one of the if you're depressed, the normal prognosis is not mass murder immediately afterwards, right? It's a lottery held between lottery winners chance. Sure. It's not the normal prognosis of depression, and therefore the papers were not only wrong to. They were not only wrong to label it as depression caused this crime, but also if you read the coverage, it was like particularly the Mail had read the Samaritan's suicide reporting guidelines and gone, well, let's light the whole scoreboard.
Yeah, let's read
the reporting was absolutely fucking diabolical on it.
I mean, isn't the argument that's being put here twofold? That the media is terrible at reporting anything to do with people acting out of mental health problems. And secondly, that human beings are sufficiently complicated, flawed, liable to fall asleep, get drunk, or suffer from periods of mental ill health, that it's actually a safeguarding in terms of how we run planes, how we have aircraft, having a co-pilot and having access to the cockpit argument.
Can you imagine a plane crash like that where it was a deliberate action on behalf of the co-pilot? I'm not defending it, but where the papers weren't obsessed with the cause, whether it was politically motivated or...
What if they just got drunk?
But that would be the news as well. Anything they could find.
You quite often see force majeure accidents like this, where, say, for example, there was a plane burned up on the runway in San Francisco sort of 6 or 8 months ago, and I think when the cause is non-mysterious, I think quite often plane accidents aren't massively well reported.
No, but it's at the point when the point where it went like that was the point where he was breathing and he locked the pilot out of the cockpit. That's when. People. Why would people want to know what happened?
Isn't the reason that it's caught the imagination so much? Just because it's so unusual, and
sure.
Isn't that the point? That yes, whether or not it's his depression that's caused it, there's no proof that it was his depression that caused it. The point is that there are millions of people with this illness who are perfectly fine, and then once you start saying, which you do seem to be saying a bit, that you have to be careful about letting them do that job, or where do you go next? Do they become bus drivers if you kill people like that?
I'm not saying that you shouldn't let depressed people be pilots or anything like it. I'm saying possibly whatever psych testing he went through, because they do some, was inadequate, or maybe it would have been impossible to spot. I'm like, I don't have any expertise.
But let's assume that you can't just spot it. In that case, you do have a choice, don't you?
But in that case, he could have not been. If you can't spot it, like it almost doesn't matter what his diagnosis was, because if you can't tell, you can't tell.
Well, if they have to have their medical records released.
But like unless. I mean, I know. I was reading something saying there's too little evidence to see if you can spot any kind of correlation, because it very rarely happens. But the fact that like 1 in 5 people are depressed on it very rarely happens has to count for something.
But we're not talking about replicants from Blade Runner here. It's not like you can do the test where you ask them about turtles, and if they go bonkers, then they're a killer. Like, there is no test for psychopath other than have you got a Periscope account?
I don't think he's a psychopath, to be honest.
Like, I don't think it is depression. I don't think it's that pathology.
Also, if you're smart enough to be an aircraft pilot and you have a wish to kill a load of people, you're also smart enough to fake the answers to a psych test.
It has to be many things.
Would you like to kill a plane full of people?
Like,
No.
most depressed people won't do that, obviously, like, self-evidently.
Yeah.
But to say that any... Like, he could have had ADHD and you couldn't say it had no part in it. Like, you literally can't say, like, it clearly, like, it doesn't mean you can't be a pilot, but it's polarised. Like, I agree saying that it was because he was depressed. Like, that doesn't fully explain what happened. Of course it doesn't. But it's complicated, because I understand why people want to say it's not that, but I just feel like you end up with, you can't. Yeah.
I see the argument, especially from American mental health campaigners, about when you see a gun massacre, often they end up saying, well, if we had better mental health treatment, and now maybe you'll take depression seriously, and so on and so forth. But I don't know if that stigmatisation really helps anyone with mental health problems.
You're right. It's not like the vast majority of depressed people hurt no one, and if they do hurt anyone, it's themselves. So I wouldn't want any sort of like restrictions on what kind of job depressed people can do, for sure. Like, definitely not. But I think it's also to be like, nope, nothing to do with it. It just seems over simplistic to me.
I also think the solution...
Like, it might be. Who knows?
I also think the solution is actually what Ryanair has been doing for about 30 years, which is you never allow...
Dissuading people from flying with them.
Absolutely. You have terrible service, and then no one will die on your plane. But they insist that you've always got 2 people in the cockpit at all times. Exactly. And that would literally have solved the problem.
Well, I mean, maybe that's maybe like talking about whether we can spot if pilots have...
Or now we need to go back to being able to open the cockpit from the outside again. Maybe we've gone too far in the totally secure cockpit.
And then, of course, when we get back to the same position, where someone will use that to hijack a plane and then we ask to go back.
Yes.
2 people in a cockpit, if that can... I don't know, like, but that sounds sensible. Like...
Presumably, if you want to kill 150 people, you can just start by murdering 1. But anyway, thank you very much, Abi and Willard. Thank you indeed. For political wonks like us, the chance to watch Channel 4's drama The Coalition was a fascinating dramatisation of the talks that went into this coalition government. Earlier, we got to speak to Mark Dexter, who played David Cameron not just in that Channel 4 drama, but is now going on to play David Cameron and Tony Blair in the West End. How was it to play David Cameron and to continue to play David Cameron as you are now on stage?
Fundamentally, it's odd. I mean, I'm still enjoying it, and I think that's essential. But most of the sort of transformative work is going to be with Blair.
I mean, who do you prefer looking like? Do you prefer looking like Tony Blair or David Cameron?
Oh, come on! I mean, I already found it slightly unsettling when I found myself hearing about Coalition. Just sort of, my agent called me as they do, and how do you feel about playing David Cameron? And
I think this sounds like a politician's art. You're getting into character. It's straight question, straight answer. David Cameron or Tony Blair?
Well, look, Blair's new to me, right? I'm just still sort of finding my way into that character. I think on the night, I'm going to prefer it in terms of how I look and feel with David Cameron, because I'm not going to be having to wear a wig, false teeth, and some ear prostheses, which keeps getting talked about, which I'm slightly nervous about.
Mark, you obviously have studied both men. To an extent, they would seem to members of the public to be acting themselves. How is it to play people who are themselves acting?
It's a good question, actually. I mean, I did a lot of YouTube searching. I mean, if most of the reason why I did so much searching is because I was trying to find sort of off the cuff or sort of candid shots that he wasn't aware of, you know, just catching him off guard in working on the theory that in actual fact, like you say, they are acting all the time. But I was looking for some footage of him when that sort of mask slipped. I couldn't find a damn thing. I know he's very media savvy and he's probably, you know, likes to keep aware of, you know, who's filming and when, but the fact that I couldn't find anything made me think maybe Dave is just Dave, and you know there is no hidden creature lurking behind the veil. It's just, whereas Blair, I don't know. There's something, because a lot of people say they've got a lot of similarities, but they're so different when you start looking into them. And there's something about Blair that I think is a lot more. There's a control element over how he presents himself, and I don't feel this easier connection with what goes on under the skin. And like I say, I'm still fresh to Blair, so maybe something will occur to me. But at the moment, I just find my eyes narrowing whenever I watch him. It's just I feel inclined to go, what are you really thinking, Tony? What's really going on? Whereas with Cameron, I just think, well, I might not agree with what he's saying, or I might wonder, as you know, whether he's got his facts right or his stats right, but I think I'd probably buy it.
Now it's time for our regular spot with returning Cub reporter Lembit Opik.
Lembit, hi.
Great to hear from both of you.
So we're back on the air for our third series in the run-up to the election.
I can't be bothered with politics at the moment. You know, I stood down as the MP for Montgomeryshire almost 5 years ago now, actually.
Lembit, didn't you lose the seat after one of the largest swings in the country?
Well, it was all Nick Clegg's fault, actually. You know, he introduced £9,000 tuition fees.
Well, that was after 2010, but anyway, what are you reporting for us this week?
Well, actually, I'm not sure I've got time to do this, guys.
No?
No, I'm very busy at the moment.
Well, that's great news. Lembit, what's on your plate?
A return to Parliament, maybe?
I'm more of a big deal in the media and PR world these days.
All right, so what's the big gig?
What aren't I doing, guys? That's the question. Actually, I'm now the second relief presenter for the overnight Sunday show on Llandudno Speaks.
What?
Yeah, Llandudno Speaks, the third biggest radio station in Llandudno. I mean, if you don't count the Welsh stations.
Ah, I see.
No, and there's more. I've just been appointed Russia Today's correspondent to Ukraine.
That sounds fascinating.
Yeah, well, it is. I'm looking forward to portraying the repression of the Russian people in eastern Ukraine.
Hasn't Russia invaded illegally? And what about MH17?
Yeah, whatever. That's a more complex issue than the West portrays. Anyway, they won't actually pay for me to go there, if I'm honest, but I do get a free supply of vodka. Well, I say vodka, it's mostly potatoes, thanks to the EU sanctions. But, you know, I've been looking up recipes.
Wow, Lembit, that's great stuff. Anything else?
Yeah, well, actually, yes, I do have my new role as the deputy head of PR for the Telecare Lighthouse in Flintshire.
I've never even heard of it.
Well, yeah, that's because it's derelict. But it's got loads of potential.
Lembit, it really doesn't sound like you have any time for us.
I mean, we were thinking of cutting down the show.
And, you know, that serial gag, Rupert, that added a minute or two right at the beginning.
Lembit, we're sorry to lose you.
No, hold on a minute, guys. I said I was busy, but there is always time.
Look, at least we've got an excuse, Rupert. Lembit, we don't want to put you under any pressure.
We'll see you around, yeah?
No, hold on. Wait a minute. I want exposure. Expose me!
Our special correspondent, Lembit Opik. Now, the man from Oxfordshire has lost his job, and May and Hammond are left to pick up the pieces. But enough about the Conservative Party's future after May the 7th. Let's talk instead about the star in a reasonably priced fracas, Jeremy Clarkson. When he asks for steak, he often likes it bloody, but he took things too far by allegedly punching his producer in a row over an evening meal on location. At least we know what his beef was. The BBC is taking a huge commercial hit, and millions of fans around the world have been left disappointed by the end of Top Gear as it once was. But can violence in the workplace ever be excused?
Willard Foxton and Abi Wilkinson are still with us. I'm not sure there's much alleged about it, but in any event, Willard, do you think it's right that the BBC sacked someone who they pushed to the very edge, didn't they?
Well, no. I mean, it's obviously completely correct that he got fired for punching someone in the workplace. There's absolutely no two ways about it. Like, if you punch someone in the face, you should be fired. But I will go as far as to say, and just to play devil's advocate, that in feature films in particular, if you've got a star and the star is violent towards someone, then it is absolutely the norm that the individual who is hit is fired and the person who is not. And the reason why is, say you've got an $80 million feature film, the marketing budget is laid in, and you've got Rupert Myers on the posters in Die Hard 6.
And you've just injured my hand.
And making an argument about the evils of capitalism.
Well, I think so, but ultimately you end up in a situation where, I mean, I know personally a sound man who's lost 3 teeth to a Hollywood star while putting a radio mic on him.
Jesus.
And that is absolutely the norm in feature films, and less money was at stake than in Top Gear. I mean, Top Gear is, depending on how you measure it, anywhere between 30 and 180 million a year. It's 350 million viewers worldwide.
It's Hollywood money.
Yeah, I think, realistically, the BBC have taken an enormously brave decision. They've taken an enormously brave decision in terms of the commercial money going into worldwide. Whether or not worldwide will be able to revive Top Gear, I don't know. But I think it's the right decision. But I think we underestimate how easy or hard a decision that was. I've got enormous respect for Tony Hall for making the right call.
Abi, do you think that if the BBC was in fact a commercial organisation, although I know it involves its commercial arm, then it would have come to a different decision here?
It's possible, but that's an incredibly depressing thought, and it made absolutely the right decision.
And why do you think that?
Because he punched someone.
But I mean, is it just me that thinks it's naive to suggest that, for instance, in the army, do you reckon in the army when squaddies go out, they don't occasionally hit each other, and they maybe spend a little time in a military suit?
I think
they don't get fired.
Okay, I think first of all that's insulting to most soldiers who are incredibly professional. I think secondly there was a power imbalance.
Well, you don't think they ever get into scraps?
I think there's a lot of things. First of all, it had been officially reported. I know fights happen at work and it doesn't get raised properly. At the point it gets raised formally, you have to act, I think, because people know about it. I'm not saying no one ever fights at work.
I mean, the one thing I think in this, I mean, I take your point on all this, but if we think about the poor producer, who obviously is completely blameless in this, if you're the producer on
so far as he alleges,
you feel like he should have had a say in it.
Well, what I'm going to say is, if you work on a huge show like that and you're the producer on it, I mean, how's it in his interests to have this show cancelled? Because that's his meal ticket, isn't it?
I think you're right, and I think it's unfortunate for everyone, including Jeremy Clarkson. But you have to have standards. Like you can't have it when people are powerful and important enough that they can get away with physically assaulting junior employees.
One of the things I think is, well, first of all, Sheen Timon isn't a junior employee by any standards. He's a relatively senior producer.
But sure, they could lose him before they lose Jeremy Clarkson.
No, quite. But one of the things I will say is, would I fire Jeremy Clarkson? Yes, but I'd fire Sheen Timon as well. Like if I'm a TV producer,
you'd fire him.
No, absolutely, I'd fire him. I'll tell you why. Right? Okay, I'm a TV producer and I regularly run shoots. And if you have multi-million pound talent, you move heaven and earth for those people to keep them happy. And if I had, well, maybe it is. But the thing about it is I'm not saying he should be fired for being punched. I'm saying he should be fired for not providing a hot meal for the talent when they got in.
Jeremy Clarkson several hours later than he was expected.
No, I agree.
That doesn't matter.
But if it was I'm saying in a feature film context, you would absolutely fire him because he has upset the talent, and that is all you need to do. You rightly said that he is worth so much less to that producer because there are hundreds of Sheen Timons and there's only one Jeremy Clarkson. So I think it would be perfectly right if there'd been no violence involved.
Well, I mean, that's a terrible dynamic that someone can throw a strop like a small child, physically assault someone else. No one should be able to throw strop if they're several hours late and they get served cold food exactly what they want. Like, I know they can, but I'm saying it's kind of almost good that the BBC is a non-commercial organisation and it can get away. Like, he should be like, this is how it should be. Like, I know it wouldn't always be like that for like monetary reasons, but
I think genuinely, if you were dealing, and we're not even talking multi-million pound talent here. I think if you were dealing with someone on the level of sort of Kirsty Allsop and Phil from location.
I don't know what kind of ranking.
Well, they're pretty low down the pecking order, let's say. But let's say you're dealing with Heston Blumenthal, anyone on that sort of like, that you've occasionally seen them on a Channel 4 billboard level. If you were the producer who got that person upset enough to, for example, phone an executive producer and say, look, I'm giving up my time, I'm not making a lot of money from this, this person promised to do thing X and they did not deliver thing X.
Toddlers, though. Like, I mean,
Okay,
you-
that's
like-
right. That's true, but I mean, think about this. Imagine it were Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt turning up, and you were the producer, and you didn't get them a hot meal. Would it actually be that surprising if you got fired for that?
I'm not saying it would be that surprising. I'm saying I think it would be wrong. Like, I understand how the world works, but I just don't think it should work like that.
People shouldn't be fired for not doing their jobs.
No, I don't. I think that it was like, I think he clearly probably tried hard, and I think you could potentially like get a disciplinary. You know, you should like. I think what he probably, he tried to provide food. Like, I imagine he tried to provide the meal that Jeremy Clarkson wanted. I doubt he was just like, I don't care.
Well, the truth is we don't know the situation on the ground.
That's true.
Absolutely.
Although you've come out all guns blazing and have said that this guy should lose his job.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No. But on the facts we have from the BBC inquiry, I think it's unarguable that certainly that person, if that person was working for me as an assistant producer, I would definitely give that person a written warning for that particular, because minding the talent is what television is.
I feel like this is a terrible industry.
What's the most trivial thing? What's the most trivial thing you've heard of someone being fired for? Then?
Having sex with a presenter.
Is that on air during the show?
No. They just had sex. They had sex with the person who was the key talent in the show, and that person, and then subsequently the relationship did not take off. It was not true love.
They made it awkward.
Exactly, and
But
they were
you know
fired
what?
for that.
That's not nothing. Like, it's difficult, isn't it? Because it's like adults.
I've known people be fired for turning up. I've seen people being fired for turning up half an hour late. I've known people be fired for refusing to go to Starbucks to get 4 coffees.
Why did they refuse? Why did they
Sorry.
refuse?
Sorry?
Why did they refuse?
They just didn't want to go.
Yeah, but
It was
hang
raining
on.
outside.
But Willard, these examples you're giving, they make sense. If your job is to go and get coffee, if you don't get coffee, you
Deliberate,
get fired.
right.
If you've got a shoot where people are being paid a lot of money and you're late and you can't shoot, that's why you get fired.
Yeah.
That's completely different, isn't it, to someone who's just reacting to a presenter being completely overbearing.
Unless we know that he didn't even try to, provide the meal Jeremy Clarkson wanted. That is just sort of.
I don't know the situation, but if I got that call from Jeremy Clarkson and he said obviously Clarkson should have been fired because he punched the guy in the face. That's the wrong way for Clarkson to respond. If Clarkson had picked up the phone to the person back in the office and said, "I've been out shooting all day. I got back to the hotel and there was no hot meal," I would definitely give that person a warning. They'd definitely get a phone call going, "What the hell do you think you were doing?"
I think they just move in circles where like cold food is still fine.
No, I agree. I mean, I have a cold buffet as well.
Well,
But
I mean, we haven't provided you with any food tonight, so I'm surprised you're still
lovely
here.
whiskey though. Lovely whiskey. The thing is, it's the equivalent of saying like a journalist, having a deadline and missing the deadline. You'd get in trouble for it.
Sure, but like there's
Rupert, why don't you have a regular collar?
Yes, I am. I've only ever worked in house, and I've not missed a deadline as such to know.
Wow.
But I've not
Everyone, employ Abi Wilkinson. She has never, ever in her life missed a deadline.
But I've not it's more that I've not had strict deadlines to miss. So, and I'm in the office as well, so I can't do that thing where you just do everything but work because it would be noticed.
Okay, Abi, we better leave it there.
Thank you.
There will be more political takeout next week, but until then, we're off to take the MP off our Twitter profiles. So that's all for now.